We all start here, believing the goal is elimination. We chase that perfect entry, that flawless exit, that mythical day where the profit and loss line moves straight up without a single drawdown. We internalize the lie that if we just study harder, if we just perfect our system, the mistakes will vanish. Why does that pursuit hurt so much? Because every time you violate your own rule, every time you click the button too early or hold too long, you do not just see a loss of capital. You see a moral failure. You feel profoundly wounded. You internalize the mistake as a flaw in you, believing you are somehow uniquely undisciplined. Stop chasing zero mistakes. It is a lie sold by people who do not trade real capital. The professional trader does not eliminate error. He manages the inevitable wound. Think about that deeply. The market is too vast, too complex, too random in the short term for any human to achieve operational perfection. The variables are infinite. So if mistakes are guaranteed, why are you destroying yourself trying to prevent the impossible? A mistake is not a moral failing. It is a data point. It is a cost of doing business. It is simply the market reminding you that your model, your expectation, was temporarily incorrect, nothing more. The moment you define a mistake as a character flaw, you lose objectivity, you trigger the ego defense mechanism, and the loop of self-sabotage begins immediately. Profitability is not about achieving a 90% win rate. That is a fantasy. Profitability is about building an infrastructure, a resilient framework, that is specifically designed to absorb tactical mistakes without suffering structural damage. You are a surgeon, not a god. You know the patient will bleed. Your focus is not stopping the bleeding entirely. Your focus is having the right tools, the right process, and the right plan to manage the blood loss so the operation can continue successfully. Your trade plan must be an infrastructure of risk management first and a prediction mechanism second. If your infrastructure fails when you make a mistake, then your infrastructure was never built for reality. The lie of needing perfection keeps you paralyzed. It keeps you small. Let me show you what happens when you discard that lie. I will show you step by step the exact framework that allows traders to be massively profitable even with a win rate as low as 40%. That means 6 out of every 10 trades can be objectively wrong and you still decisively win the war. It starts with understanding the fundamental difference between a tactical mistake and a true strategic error. A tactical mistake is simple. It is a loss that occurs within the boundaries of your established, tested trading system. You executed the plan perfectly. You saw the setup. You entered the trade size dictated by your risk model, and you placed the stop exactly where the system required. The market simply did not agree with your hypothesis. The stop was hit. This is not a failure. This is simply the cost of doing business. It is data. You paid the tuition to learn something about market structure, and you moved on. A process. Failure is something else entirely. It is a violation of the sacred contract you made with yourself. It is not an error of market analysis. It is an error of self-management. It is placing a trade that does not meet your criteria because you were bored. It is increasing your size because you are angry about the last loss. It is moving your stop loss 5 minutes before the market reverses, turning a manageable 1 risk unit loss into a catastrophic 5 risk units hole in your account. It is the moment you prioritized your emotional need for a win over the structural integrity of your capital. The intermediate trader, the one stuck in this hidden stage of mediocrity, constantly confuses the two. Why? Because the ego cannot accept the truth that the problem is internal. It is much easier to externalize the blame. It is easier to say, the market faked me out, or my system failed, than it is to admit, I lack the discipline to follow my own rules. You intellectualize the process failure. You try to turn revenge trading into a re-entry strategy. You try to turn moving the stop into dynamic risk management. You create elaborate post hoc rationalizations for something that was purely emotional and destructive. The result is that you never fix the real problem. You keep searching for a technical indicator to solve a psychological flaw. The truth is brutal. A tactical error costs you money. A process failure costs you your career. Think about the psychological cost of a process failure. It is not just the dollars, it is the deep, corrosive shame that follows. When you violate your own rules, you destroy trust, not in the market, but in yourself. That self-trust is the bedrock of consistent profitability. When you move that stop-loss, you are telling yourself, my plan is worthless, my discipline is a joke, and the market, which is merely a mirror reflecting your internal state, responds by punishing that lack of integrity. You are fighting yourself, not the chart. Tactical errors are necessary. They are the friction that refines your edge. You must make tactical errors to prove your system works. When you take 10 trades and 6 are losses, but they were all executed perfectly according to plan, you can look at that data and say, the system is sound, the edge is positive. You learn something valuable. But when you take 10 trades and 3 of the losses were due to emotional, rule-breaking entries, that data is contaminated. You cannot trust your results. You cannot fix what you cannot measure. You are operating in a state of perpetual confusion, trying to fix a faulty indicator when the hand holding the mouse is the actual source of the error. This is the pivot point. The tactical error requires a mechanical adjustment, maybe a slightly wider stop, maybe a different entry trigger. The process failure requires a psychological intervention. You cannot fix greed or fear with a technical indicator. You must address the internal flaw. Until you can look at your trade journal and categorize every loss, not as simply a loss, but specifically as tactical error or process failure, you will remain trapped in the cycle of emotional spirals. Your ego demands perfection, and when you achieve anything less than perfect, it turns to chaos. Process failures are always, without exception, the result of ego refusing to accept the small, acceptable loss. It is the ego that says, I deserve to be right, and then risks the entire account, proving a point to the market that does not care. The most profitable traders I know have a near-zero process failure rate. They accept tactical losses with the emotional detachment of a machine. They treat their process failures like a moral breach. The question then becomes, how do you build a framework robust enough to isolate and eliminate process failures entirely? How do you create the self-awareness necessary to catch the ego before it presses the oversized button? The answer is simpler than you think, but it requires radical, unforgiving honesty about the one thing you refuse to track. That one thing is your maximum acceptable pain, not in dollar terms, but in percentage terms, relative to the size of your account. We call this the R multiple, or the risk unit. The risk unit is the definition of surrender. It is the amount of capital you commit to losing before the market has a chance to tell you how wrong you are. This is not about setting a stop-loss arbitrarily. It is about setting a mental boundary that defines your psychological capacity for error. If you risk 1% of your account per trade, then one risk unit equals 1%. That 1% is the shield. It is the maximum acceptable pain you can feel without compromising the integrity of your entire trading system. This pre-commitment is the foundation of the unemotional infrastructure. It isolates the mechanical decision from the emotional outcome. You are defining the cost of the lesson before the tuition is paid. The rule is brutal in its simplicity, and it is non-negotiable. Never risk more than 1% to 2% of your total capital on a single trade. If you hold a $100,000 account, your maximum pain on any single position is $2,000. That $2,000 is your one risk unit. This is where psychology meets position sizing, and position sizing becomes the ultimate defense mechanism. If your stop-loss requires the position to be 50 points away, you must adjust the share or contract size until 50 points of movement equals exactly $2,000. You must downsize the position until the risk fits the boundary. Why is this so powerful? Because the market cannot kill what the market cannot touch. When you adhere strictly to the one risk unit defense, you are ensuring that no single trade, no matter how fundamentally wrong your analysis was, can inflict a mortal wound. It can only inflict a paper cut. When you violate this rule, when the ego whispers that this setup is different, and you press the oversized button, You are not risking money. You are risking your future self. You are risking the psychological identity that you need to execute the next 50 trades correctly. You are trading the integrity of your process for a temporary, fleeting sense of certainty. That is the cost. The true genius of the R-multiple concept lies in its ability to neutralize tactical mistakes instantly. Let us run the numbers, the only language the market respects. Imagine you take 4 trades. Your analysis was flawed, your timing was suboptimal, and you are stopped out 4 times for a loss. 4 distinct mistakes. But because you adhered to the 1 risk unit rule, your total damage is precisely 4%, 4 losing trades, and your account is still 96% whole. The ego is bruised, yes, but the system is intact. Now, you execute your 5th trade perfectly. You let the winner run, trailing your stop until you capture a 5 risk unit return. That single trade brings in 5%. What is your net result? Plus 1%. 4 tactical mistakes, 1 successful execution, and you are profitable. The 4 losses become statistical noise. They become neutral events. This is the definition of resilience in the market. You have built a framework that allows you to be wrong 4 times out of 5 and still make money. When you risk only 1 risk unit, the losing trade is not a judgment on your intelligence. It is not a failure. It is merely the expected, predetermined cost of acquiring necessary information. You have neutralized the emotional poison of the loss by making it statistically insignificant. You have built an impenetrable firebreak between your bank account and your ego. The goal is not to eliminate losses. The goal is to make losses irrelevant to your overall emotional state. The intermediate trader who refuses to track their R-multiple, who refuses to adhere to the 1 to 2% sizing rule, is trading without a shield. They are 1 bad trade away from emotional collapse. They are the ones who turn a 1 risk unit loss into a 5 risk unit revenge trade, compounding their error exponentially. They are the ones who trade 10% risk because they need to make back the 2% they lost yesterday. This is where the process failure becomes a catastrophic system failure. If you size up to 5 risk unit risk, that single losing trade instantly wipes out the potential profit of the next 5 winning trades you might capture. Worse, it triggers the stress response, flooding your system with cortisol. You are now trading scared, regardless of how profitable the next setup looks. You are chasing the hole you just dug. The R-multiple is the mechanical defense, but its true purpose is to protect your mental capital. When you violate the size, you are trading your psychological identity for a temporary thrill. You are telling the market you are willing to blow up your process just for a chance at instant gratification. This R-multiple shield is what allows me to make money even when I make tactical mistakes. I forgive the mistake instantly because the cost was predetermined and acceptable. The market is constantly testing that shield. It whispers to you to double the size, just this once. It promises certainty where there is none. Your job is to be the silent architect of your own pain threshold. If you can master the size of the trade, you have mastered the fear of the trade. But mastering the size is only half the battle. Because if you do not know the exact mathematical expectation of your edge, if you do not know what R-multiple you are actually aiming for, you are still trading blindly, hoping for a return that your system was never designed to deliver. You need to define the payoff before you define the risk. That is the final, essential piece of the infrastructure we must build, defining the potential R-multiple and knowing when to let it run. But defining the potential R-multiple is only half the battle. The other half is the psychological crucible, where that potential is usually destroyed, the moment the trade moves against you. Why do we abandon our plan? Why do we widen the stop loss? Why do we stare at the screen, paralyzed, watching a manageable 1 risk unit loss turn into a catastrophic 5 risk unit drawdown? It is the ego paradox. The market is a perfect mirror, reflecting your deepest insecurities and your greatest arrogance back at you. When you lose money, your ego does not register it as a statistical cost of business. It registers it as being wrong. And to the ego, being wrong is equivalent to being stupid or unskilled or unworthy. This is the moment detachment dies. The loss becomes personal. The trade stops being a data point and starts being a judgment. The moment you equate a losing trade with a personal failure, you have already lost the war. You have surrendered your strategic position to the emotional whims of a child who hates being told no. This is where we must introduce the concept of immediate detachment. Immediate detachment means that the moment your order is filled, the outcome of that specific trade ceases to hold any emotional significance. It is now a statistical event, one of thousands you will execute over your career. Your stop loss is not a suggestion. It is the boundary of your sanity. It is non-negotiable. The instant the price touches that line, you execute the exit without negotiation, without hesitation, and crucially, without emotion. The market does not care about your conviction. It does not care that you spent 3 hours analyzing the divergence. It only cares about order flow. Negotiating the stop loss is the ultimate act of valuing your ego over your long-term survival. It is the moment you choose temporary validation, the hope that the market will turn around and prove you right, over the ironclad discipline required to preserve capital. Hope is not a trading strategy. It is the slow, silent poison that kills trading careers. Think about the psychology of moving a stop loss just one tick. What are you saying to yourself? You are saying, my analysis is so perfect that this one tick fluctuation must be noise, and I deserve to be right. That is not analysis. That is arrogance disguised as patience. It is the fear of being wrong manifesting as capital destruction. Fear of being wrong and its cousin, the fear of missing out, are not character flaws. They are symptoms of a broken process rooted in a lack of detachment. If you had true detachment, you would not fear missing a move, because you would trust that your system will generate the next signal and you will execute it flawlessly. If you had true detachment, you would not fear being wrong on the current trade, because you understand that the system's profitability is derived from the average outcome of 50 trades, not the certainty of one. When you feel that tightness in your chest, that desperate need for the market to validate your entry, that is your signal that you are prioritizing the emotional payoff of being right over the mathematical expectation of your system. Your job is not to predict the market. Your job is to execute the edge. That is all. The market will do what it wants in the short term, and the short term is inherently random. You must accept this statistical cruelty. You must accept that your best setup, executed perfectly, will still fail 40% or 50% of the time, depending on your system's win rate. That failure is not a mistake. It is simply the cost of admission. The mistake is resisting that failure. The mistake is fighting the stop loss. The paradoxical wisdom of trading is this: you only gain control when you surrender it. You surrender the control over the immediate outcome of the trade. You surrender the need to be right. You surrender the emotional attachment to the money you have just risked. When you enter a trade, that money is no longer yours. It is dedicated capital, allocated to test a hypothesis. If the hypothesis fails, the capital is consumed and you move on. Treat the stop loss like paying a utility bill. It is necessary, routine, and utterly boring. Your focus must shift entirely. Stop focusing on the profit and loss of the trade you are currently in. Focus only on the R multiple execution. Did you follow the plan? Did you exit at the defined 1 risk unit loss? Did you manage the winner to the defined 2 risk units or 3 risk units target? The profitability of your account is not determined by the success of your last 5 trades. It is determined by the flawless execution of your process over hundreds of trades. You are trading the law of large numbers. Acceptance of the mistake without resistance leads directly to profit. Resistance, the clinging to the idea that you should not have been wrong, is what generates catastrophic drawdowns. The moment you execute that stop loss instantly, you have won, regardless of the profit and loss. You have won because you prioritized the process over the ego. You prioritized survival over temporary pride. The most dangerous moment in any trade is not the moment you enter, but the moment the trade hits the stop and you begin to negotiate. That negotiation is the sound of your long-term survival being sacrificed for the immediate gratification of proving your initial bias was correct. But how do you train yourself for that immediate detachment? How do you build the psychological muscle that executes the stop-loss without flinching, without the internal argument? It starts with recognizing the voice of the ego for what it is, a liability, and then establishing a hard, physical barrier between your impulse and your capital. That barrier is often less about the technology and more about the ritual you impose on yourself. A ritual that defines exactly what you must do when the market tells you, unequivocally, that you were wrong. A ritual that defines exactly what you must do when the market tells you, unequivocally, that you were wrong. This ritual is not just psychological. It is the physical implementation of mathematical asymmetry. It is the structure that allows you to be wrong more often than you are right, and still, relentlessly, generate profit. The market does not grade you on accuracy. It grades you on structure. This structure is defined by one number, the only number that separates the professional from the permanent amateur: expectancy. Expectancy is the cold, hard proof that you do not need to be right most of the time to make a fortune. You need to be structured right every time. Forget win rate for a moment. Win rate is a psychological crutch, a statistic the ego desperately clings to for validation. Expectancy, often written as E, is the average amount of R, your defined risk unit, you can expect to make per trade over a large sample size. It is a simple formula: average win size multiplied by win rate, minus average loss size multiplied by loss rate. Most retail traders fail because they unknowingly seek a high win rate. To achieve 80% accuracy, they are forced to take small, quick profits, maybe 0.5 risk units, to ensure the trade closes green, while simultaneously holding on to large, painful losses, hoping they will come back, often letting them run to 2 risk units or 3 risk units. They are trading a negative expectancy system. They are mathematically guaranteed to bleed out slowly, regardless of how smart they feel on any given day. Let us put this into stark, undeniable contrast. Trader A boasts an 80% win rate. They feel smart. They feel validated. They post their green days on social media. But their average win is 0.5 risk units, and their average loss is 2 risk units. When you do the math, their expectancy is negative 0.2 risk units. They are guaranteed to fail slowly, painfully, and confusingly. Now look at Trader B. They only win 40% of the time. They are wrong more often than they are right. They are constantly stopping out. But their average winner is 3.5 risk units, and their average loss is strictly 1 risk unit. Their expectancy is positive 0.8 risk units. Trader A is always happy but always losing money. Trader B is constantly dealing with the emotional weight of losses, yet their account grows exponentially. Which one are you currently modeling? The market pays for patience, not precision. The 40% trader understands the math of asymmetry implicitly. They know that a messy entry, a tactical mistake, a slightly early press of the button, is irrelevant if the risk structure is sound. Your job is not to find the perfect entry point. Your job is to define the perfect, inviolable stop-loss point. That stop-loss defines 1 risk unit. It defines the maximum cost of being wrong. This is the hard, physical barrier between your impulse and your capital. If you define 1 risk unit correctly, and you are only hunting opportunities that project 3 risk units, 5 risk units, or 10 risk units potential, you have built a system that is inherently robust to human error. You can enter slightly early, slightly late, or slightly clumsy, and the trade structure will still carry the weight of the opportunity. The market allows you to make tactical mistakes, provided those mistakes cost 1 risk unit, and your wins pay for 3 or more of them. This is the difference between hunting for accuracy and hunting for opportunity. Accuracy is a liability because it feeds the ego. Asymmetry is the only sustainable edge. Most traders fight desperately for that 80% accuracy because they are trying to prove something to themselves. They confuse trading with validation. They want the dopamine hit of being right, believing that high accuracy equates to mastery. But the professional knows that win rate is vanity. Expectancy is the only number that matters. Why fight tooth and nail to be right 4 out of 5 times only to make $50 on a trade, when you can calmly accept a 60% loss rate and build a path to financial independence? This shift from precision hunter to asymmetry hunter is the final stage of maturity. It means you have stopped judging yourself based on the outcome of the last trade and started judging your process based on the undeniable math of hundreds of trades. You must accept that the cost of doing business is one risk unit, and that cost will be paid frequently. But the payment is worth it because the opportunity structure is designed to return multiple times that cost. But the math, while necessary, is not sufficient. To truly implement this structure, to hold for that 3 risk unit target when the market is offering you a quick, comforting 1 risk unit profit, you must first dismantle the deep-seated psychological fear of missing out, the fear that sabotages the very structure we just defined. That fear is rooted in a psychological dependency that few traders ever recognize. That fear is rooted in a psychological dependency that few traders ever recognize. That dependency forces you to look away from the failure. It makes you treat your trading journal like a diary, a place to vent emotion, seek validation, or catalog excuses, instead of a laboratory for data. If you are stuck, you are likely treating your losses as moral failures instead of leveraging them as tuition. The most powerful shift you can make right now is to redefine your trading journal, not as a diary of feelings, but as a cold, clinical audit of process adherence. Stop journaling how you felt. Start auditing what you did. The goal of the cold audit is to instantly neutralize the emotional charge of the loss. When a trade goes against you, the profit and loss is irrelevant for the first 5 minutes. What matters is the immediate, dispassionate investigation. The loss is not a signal to panic. It is simply a data point, perhaps the most valuable data point you will receive all week. The audit begins with 3 essential questions, and they must be asked immediately before the market has time to cloud your judgment with a potential reversal. First, was this a tactical error or a process failure? Did the setup fail to materialize because the market structure invalidated the edge, or did I invalidate the edge by deviating from the entry criteria, moving the stop, or prematurely exiting? Most traders spend 90% of their time blaming the market, a tactical error, when 90% of their losses are actually process failures, a personal choice. Be brutally honest here. If you know you violated the rules, the market is not the lesson. You are the lesson. Second, did I adhere strictly to the 1 risk unit rule? Regardless of the outcome, whether it was a scratch or a full stop out, was the risk defined and adhered to before I pressed the button? The size of the dollar loss is irrelevant. What matters is the integrity of the risk unit. If you risked more than your defined 1 risk unit, the trade was flawed from conception. The loss is secondary. The process violation is catastrophic. And third, did this single trade compromise the integrity of my system? Meaning, did I take a loss so large that it fundamentally changed my ability to execute the next 5 trades without psychological pressure? If the answer is no, if the loss was controlled, defined, and expected, then the system is protected. If you can answer those 3 questions cleanly and confidently, the loss is already profitable. It has served its function as a stress test for your discipline. Amateur traders see a losing streak and immediately overhaul their entire strategy. They chase the holy grail, assuming the failure lies in the indicators, the moving averages, or the time frame. They confuse iteration with revolution. The professional trader, having completed the cold audit, recognizes that tactical errors rarely require an overhaul. They require refinement. If the setup was valid but the entry was slightly early, that is not a systemic flaw. That is an input calibration. You iterate the edge. You make the necessary microscopic adjustment, maybe waiting for a tighter confirmation candle or shifting your entry time by 5 minutes, and you move on. This is how a true edge is forged. Through the compounding effect of disciplined clinical adjustment. Every controlled loss is an investment in resilience. Think of it this way. Your worst trade, the one that adhered perfectly to all rules, risked exactly one risk unit, and still resulted in a stop-out, is the most valuable data point you have. It proves that your system can withstand the maximum expected negative variance without breaking your account or your psychology. That trade reinforces the muscle memory required to prevent catastrophic loss. The compounding effect of disciplined mistake management is powerful precisely because it shifts your focus away from the outcome and onto the process. You stop trying to avoid losses, which is impossible, and start focusing on controlling their maximum depth, which is entirely possible. When you can look at a red profit and loss and calmly confirm that you followed every single rule, the market has not beaten you. You have simply paid the premium for the next trade. This clinical detachment is the ultimate form of leverage. Controlled loss is not just a cost of doing business. It is the mechanism by which you purchase the right to participate in the future. It is the price of keeping your mental capital intact. But maintaining this stoicism, this clinical detachment, requires a radical separation of self from capital. It requires a level of emotional discipline that the market actively tries to dismantle. We must understand how to install that separation, how to treat money not as a score, but as ammunition. Ammunition is designed to be expended. Your system, if it is robust, must be designed for imperfection. You are human. You will make mistakes. The profit does not come despite your errors. The profit requires them because the infrastructure you built is designed to capitalize on the market's chaos, not your flawless execution. If you demand perfection, you are trading a fantasy. If you accept the inevitable wound, you are trading reality. Your goal is simple. Ensure that market weakness is expensive for the market and profoundly cheap for you. This is the difference between a gambler and a structural trader. The gambler pays the price of uncertainty. The trader pays the price of presence. What is the price of presence? It is the absolute, non-negotiable adherence to the process you designed when you were calm. Forget the profit and loss today. Forget what the chart is doing. Your only job is to execute the system. That is the only true control you actually possess. You cannot control the price. You cannot control the news cycle. True control is exercised over self, not over charts. Trade the system. Trust the risk unit. Accept the inevitable wound that every successful trade sequence must include. If you can operationalize this acceptance, if you can truly let go of the need to be right, then the market stops being a battleground and starts being a mechanism. But how do we install this radical acceptance? That is the next step. To achieve the self-mastery required to eliminate process failures, you must cultivate a resilient inner fortress. This is precisely the purpose of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. This book is his private journal, where he wrestles with how to manage anger and disappointment, and how to find meaning and purpose in daily actions, even amidst the chaos of leading the Roman Empire. The teachings found in the 12 books of Meditations are Stoic principles designed to guide your ruling mind, helping you remain composed whether facing intense pain or loss. By reading his raw, honest reflections, you gain a companion for navigating the complexities of your own life, allowing you to focus only on what is within your control, your own judgment and integrity. Use this practical toolkit for the mind to stop externalizing blame and start building the inner strength necessary for consistent profitability. Find the Rowan Ashworth 2025 edition of Meditations linked below.